our catch-up or a status call conference call to discuss and let you know what we are doing here at AAIS behind the scenes to work on the blockchain data call or the COVID-19 data call using a blockchain technology, the OpenIDL that we've developed. And so we want to welcome everybody. Thank you all for your time. Thank you for supporting this work around the blockchain. We're pretty encouraged about where we are, and we're very happy to share that with you today. I'm going to, let's see. Yeah. Okay, so for those of you that haven't used a Zoom before, there's a little box down at the bottom, and there's a place where you can raise your hand if you have a question, and it will come up, and you can either in the chat thing type question, and please feel free to do that throughout the meeting. Or you can raise your hand, and as we get through a section, we'll try to recognize you for the question. It just gets a little complicated when a lot of people are on a call like this and everyone tries to talk at once. So to keep the flow going, again, if you have a raise your hand question, you want to ask something verbally, raise your hand on that feature, or you can type out the question and we will answer it as we go through the presentation. So let me start sharing here. I also want to note that we have some of the folks from IBM on the call with us. They have been just completely instrumental and our partner in developing this technology, and will be very important as we go forward in helping companies get information into the harmonized data store. So thank you for joining us, our IBM friends. And then also we'll have a few folks who might come on. I know we had some folks from the Hartford that accepted, and from Travelers that accepted on this call. So you do have two of the participating companies on the call, and I'll cover a little bit more about the participation as we get to the agenda. So let me see if I can actually get this to come up correctly. Okay.
Could you do me a favor? Yeah. When Bruce going potty, when she scratches at the door to
Okay, so let's start.
Can we also ask everyone to mute themselves except for the presenters, and that way we won't get any background noises coming in. Thank you.
You might still, however, hear my dog snoring. So, all right. All right, so you should see right now the COVID-19 response: business interruption, loss of income, data call, proof of concept using blockchain. So did the screen come up, or is it my next slide view? I don't think it really matters too much. I only have 2 slides.
It's there.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, not a big deal. So we're just going to go forward. So here's what we're going to talk about today, so that we move this kind of along and you guys are able to kind of see what we're doing. We're going to go over the work plan itself, and that's along the lines of the work as we've planned it, kind of the proof of concept in a workflow. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the companies that are participating. We're going to go over what we've done as far as the harmonized data store goes live, and that's kind of the important part because there's a lot going on here behind the scenes that Joe and Dina will talk to you about. And then how we had to develop, part of that work is extraction pattern development and kind of the report environment, what you might see at the end of this. And then as we close, we're going to give you a demonstration of the logon, which is basically your UI, where you would go in, so you can start to see as we progress, and as if we get this and everybody loves it and we decide we're going to do this in the future, what your interaction would be on the OpenIDL. Obviously, this is being developed more in a static environment, but in the long run, we're hoping that it's more a collaborative thing, and that's important for you to start to get comfortable with the actual log on to the OpenIDL and how it would work. So just start seeing that and experiencing it yourselves. And then we'll have some next steps of things that we're going to ask you to do or think about doing. And then, we'll open it up for any questions or comments at that point. So with that, I'm going to hand this back over to Truman Esmond. Was our Vice President for Solutions Partnerships at AEIS and has been one of the charter members and developers for OpenIDL. So Truman, take it away.
Thank you very much. Give me 1 second here and I will fire up my couple of slides here. So what we want to do is just to give you an overview of what it is that we're developing from the technical platform perspective and give you a quick overview of where we are. As Robin mentioned, we are partnering with IBM to deliver oh, and you can see my screen, correct? Let me make sure I'm sharing the right one. Right, this? Okay. And I can even present this too. There we go. Everybody seeing the right thing?
Yes.
So these are the key activities that we are performing with IBM to establish what is a 6-node environment for this initial proof of concept for the NEIC COVID-19 data call. There'll be 1 to 4 carrier environments. We have the first 2 that that Robin mentioned already, and we have an analytics environment, which will be where the resulting visualization of the data exists and where you can retrieve the data itself. And then the multi-tenant environment that AEIS operates, and we'll actually be looking at the interface later on for that as a regulator creating the bi-state or the national data call from the NEIC. Then implementing the data model supporting the COVID-19 data calls, and then the method to actually do the request and basically query all the distributed data stores to deliver the summary data set that will provide really an ongoing view into what's happening with the BI marketplace. And then we're actually building that query model right now. And let me move to the next slide and show you where we are on our actual timeline. We did rapidly switch gears from what we were working on before. Obviously, everybody's world was turned upside down somewhere around St. Patrick's Day. And we began this effort very quickly and shifting, and over the next, really finishing here in the next, within the next 2 weeks, we will have our technical platform completed. We already have 2 of the 4 nodes completed and up and running and beginning the initial testing, and we will be prepared to start loading carrier data into the respective nodes as early as potentially late this week or probably early next week from a technical perspective. As we look through this, there are some things that we have dependencies on bringing the data into the system. So we're not exactly sure on when the data visualization will be available, but the technical platform will be completed in terms of the entire round trip that Joe will explain using notional data set, AKA make-believe data, and how this will work over the next few weeks. Where we are briefly in status with the carriers, we are engaged with Travelers in the Hartford at this point, getting the initial meeting started, understanding where we are from the data that's been prepared to answer the initial NEIC data call, and then what the slightly different data set that'll be required to respond, or not required, but would be ideal to respond in the in this data call that would be submitted to the harmonized data store in the OpenIDL peer. The Hartford had a deep technical review at the end of last year, so they're a little bit ahead with respect to the deep technical understanding of the platform, and we are working through that with Travelers at this point. Quick notes, we should be getting both of those access to those nodes by the companies to begin to kick the tires and doing test data loads as early as later this week. As soon as we have an understanding of the work required and the timeline to deliver that work, to get the current data that's being exported to support the core call, and get that pattern established. As soon as we have some ETAs as we work with the carriers, we'll keep that up to date. In addition, and I will hand it back to Robin and talk about how we're going to bring more carriers into the fold.
Thanks, Truman. For right now, obviously we have a yes from Hartford, and I think they were able to do that because they had late last year, had already stood up an OpenIDL node, and so they had some, I guess, better hands-on experience with the actual work that to stand up a node and bring it live. So it was technically a little easier for them. The travelers obviously gave us a bit of a conditional yes, but a yes, and we're going through and trying to answer all of their questions regarding security and other things so that they have, I don't see that we have any barriers to that at this time. I think we're working through a lot of their questions about how. I think it was a yes, but how, and how can we? And so we're working through the how can we with travelers, and I think that work is going well. Truman, you probably were the last to have a technical conversation with them, so if you just want to briefly touch on that.
Yep, we're digging into the technical architecture and test data sets, some of the things that Joe will be touching on today. And again, getting an understanding of what the data that is readily available and some of the data streams that we're familiar with, and where the data that was new data requested as part of the data call, and how do we bring that in, and exactly where that came from to bring that in a way that'll allow us better reporting in a more timely and really dashboard style way over time. And allows us to ask the next follow-up question and make that relatively easy when we get into some things that we know will come up as soon as the first answer is delivered.
Right. So I think we're on very good footing there. We did get the initial no from State Farm, those were the first 3 carriers that we asked to participate. And while they did say no, they are continuing to talk to us. So I would say that's a no right now. I don't know if we can bring them along fast enough in this to get into a first round, but hope springs eternal. So if there is connectivity to State Farm from any of the regulators that have joined us, and you want to take a shot at saying, yeah, do that with them, we certainly encourage and welcome you. So I think they're still open to exploring, and we'll be diligent about that. Now, we have asked some additional carriers to consider this. We went in and took a look at the top writers in this space for each one of your states, and we'll be happy to send that along with a recording of this video. Basically, there were some standouts. One of the first standouts was the Philadelphia Insurance Company, and we have reached out to them. We have a good working relationship with Philadelphia, but they have pretty much gotten the directive from Tokyo Marine, which is their parent company, that they're going to concentrate on customers and serving policyholders at this point, and they don't want any new projects. Now, that's been passed up the chain, but I think that there's still a possibility because they are statistically relevant to speak to. Also, AIG has at least one company that is pretty statistically significant in all your states. And so we've also reached out to AIG to speak with them about participating. Cincinnati is another company that is statistically relevant in this discussion. So if you have great connectivity with any particular executive in those companies, I would ask that you consider having maybe a sidebar conversation with us after this to talk about how we can strategically approach those companies to push toward getting a third carrier into the first round. I don't think it is a deal breaker that we don't have that third one, but I would like to see that in order to give more anonymity to travelers in Hartford data, because while they are putting things in the data store, the answers that will be given in response to the questions that we ask through those extraction patterns, we want to have it in such a way that it is not revealing anybody's particular identity, and you're able to share that with and share the results with more people. In other words, showcase what we've done a little deeper, and we think that's probably a better representation if we have at least 3 carriers in that mix. Who am I leaving out?
Real quick, 1 second, because I also want to mention that it may be helpful if you've got a large single state carrier within each of your states that we could bring in. We can support them in the multi-tenant node. They don't need to stand up a full node, even though it should be fairly lightweight for them. So if there's a particular carrier of note that would be large enough to provide some data cover, if you will, in that space, we can support them as well. So it's not just the very large companies within the given states, just the significant ones in the markets.
And the other carrier of note that we've reached out is Farmers. Farmers also has a pretty large presence. So for those companies that I've just talked about, and then we'll send you, again, attach the spreadsheet, the analysis we did for top riders in these lines of business for each of your states. And so you can take a look at those and see if you have any relationships that you believe you could leverage to get them in. And again, as Truman said, we don't have to have a carrier that wants to stand up their own node. If they'd like to come in at that multi-tenant environment, we can support that because we have worked to support that from a technical platform. Okay, so let's move along. Truman, I think Joe is next.
Yep, Joe's next.
Okay. Let me get something up on my screen. And you guys should be seeing deck. Yep. Okay, good. So yeah, we, as Robin alluded to, we want to celebrate to start that the data, the harmonized data store is live. We've had the infrastructure up and working for quite a bit now, the better part of the year. But what we've finally hit as a milestone is that we can support the COVID-19 calls with the data model that's been implemented into the harmonized data store. So that's a big thing for us. And to just kind of put a face to the name, the harmonized data store is this guy that lives out over here. I'd like to flash this slide just to kind of set the context of what we're talking about when we're referring to a node and the data process that goes into making the calls possible in the first place. And so what we've done for the timeliness of what we're trying to do here is defined an input. And so, the long-term goal is that we can support many different formats of data coming through the system. We'll work with onboarding all this with our carriers. But today, to respond to the COVID call, we want to make it nice, clean, easy, straightforward. And so we're defining an input up front that is ready to use. And that's coming out of the left side systems and going into the node environments. And so we're taking that data and we're running it through various different governance procedures to make sure the quality is what we expect of it and what's been defined in that input. We're doing our transformations to get the fingerprints committed over to the blockchain ledger, as well as loading all of the transactional data that's required to that harmonized data store. Once that is happening, it can happen at any interval that makes sense. We've defined the grain of the data and the interval of the actual snapshot of the information in that input standard as well. But as far as the loading times, that can happen as fast as every 5 minutes if that suits your use case. So that's all up and going. It's putting the data there, it's waiting for the data calls now to be executed. And so we'll talk in a minute about the extraction patterns and what that means and what that is. But as far as this picture is concerned, you can just think of it as this reporting guy over here. All this other mechanisms is kind of behind the scenes, but what we're really focused on sharing with you today is the reporting output and that value you might see through that. Okay. So how did we get here and where are we going? The timeline that Truman showed on his second slide is kind of a little bit more detailed, a little different view of what this is. This is how we've pivoted from what we were originally undertaking with extending OpenIDL for, it was actually work for personal and commercial auto. The team has, March 20th said, okay, well, there is a real need here. There's something we can do, and there's a way we can respond that makes a difference. And so we assembled our team on that date. We stopped all development on the personal commercial auto front, and we started modeling in, originally it was just business owners' policies to the data standard to see if we could then respond to the calls that we're seeing, from the NAIC, from California, from Washington, various states were doing their own as well. And so it took us, just a couple of weeks. We were able to assemble the data standard, the data model for BOP, and then we started working and got the ETL work, which is all that data processing on the previous slide, configured to accept all that data and put it in the harmonized data store. What we discovered along the way too, though, is that BOP wasn't just going to do it. So we have other commercial multi-peril business that lands at different lines, and the way the data standard was built, it was not going to tell the whole picture. And so we pivoted again and started building in a multi-line process to the OpenIDL data ingestion process. And so that happened kind of the mid-May timeframe. Didn't really take us very long, and just a couple weeks later, we had the ability to process both commercial multi-peril and BOP data with this environment. As of recently as early as yesterday, we've made another decision to include in the marine data into this as well. We figured that's going to give us the total complete picture for what the current understanding of our data calls could be. It's not to say that we can't expand into more questions, into more areas. We'll talk about that a little bit when Dina comes up, but that's being built in as well. Not a challenge to the timeline. We're expecting in the next couple weeks to have full support for all of that, and actually that's like tested, QA'd everything. So we will be able to start working with the carriers as early as the end of the week to start formatting that data, testing and getting it in and getting ready. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about data quality too, because one thing that comes up frequently is, well, how do we know that the data is what we expect it to be when we're making these calls? Every time in the past, you're kind of in this left-hand side of the slide where every time you're making a call, it's a different call. It's coming from different sources. You've got to wrangle, curate, put context to that data every single time something new comes up. That generates a lot of questions. How did you come up with that curation process? What does this data mapping mean? What is X? You can think of probably better examples than I can, because you're in this every day. What we do with OpenIDL, again, is on the right. I love this slide because it does show how we're doing that mapping one time. It's not, yes, we are responding to the COVID-19 calls right now, but it's still going into the OpenIDL data standard. And so we're doing that mapping one time, and we're actually putting a little bit more color in there than what we just see as the questions right now, so that we can, in the very near future, start responding to other types of information requests with this. And we don't have to go back and say, is this monthly data, or is this daily data, annual data? That's all built into the standard, and so we can have confidence that that data coming out is what we think it is. And then the extraction pattern. So this is getting the data out. So you can think on the bottom right there, we have all these harmonized data stores deployed on the different nodes in the system. And what we do is, this dotted line represents kind of the cutover point of where the source data that's been formatted and structured and governed comes out in an analytic data set. And so this is the one we've defined for the current calls. And not to say it can't, like I mentioned, we have additional color that we've added to the data. But this is what we see that we need coming out to actually respond to the different calls, especially the one that the NAIC issued last month. And so I won't read through all the different data elements, but you can kind of just take a glance right now, perusal, and we have all this information in different ways that we can share with you beyond that. But there is an arrow that points somewhere else over to the right. And so with that, unless there's any questions, and I wasn't seeing any coming up on the chat, I will let Dina take over the share and show you what we've been able to produce so far with the, as Trim mentioned, the notional or made up data sets that we created to test this extraction pattern, and does it actually work to produce some value for us, okay?
Sorry, let me just get the share up. I can't tell. Can you see the business data model up?
We do. Yep.
Okay, great. I was just going to show it real fast. This is the business data model. As Joe mentioned, we are going to add inland marine to it, so it has, it's not on here yet. And then he also showed the elements that we added on there. There are a little bit over 20 elements, and there might be like 1 or 2 more added to it from the inland marine. But the reports that were created, and this is all based on test data, just to keep in mind. So this is a recreation of the actual NAIC data call Excel that was sent out. So this is what we came up with. As Joe said, we have business owners and commercial properties, and then we identified the company size based on, I think we used the California guidelines on this for large, medium, and small. Small was anything less than 100 employees, medium is 100 to 500, and then large is 500 plus. And then you can see the direct written premium based on, sorry, it just cleared on me, based on the company size. And then you also have the number of policies in force within the year, then the percentage of the viral exclusion from those policies, and then the percentage of the physical loss. And then I also did the same thing for claims based on the Excel that was sent out by the NAIC. But because we also had other data, I went ahead and created other reports, such as this one. This is just a map of the written premium within the US. So then it's color coded to see which ones have like the most. There's also, it's just different ways that you can look at the data, like different slices, depending on what you're, if you want to identify or hone in on something. I feel like you don't know what you don't know, but this way you can look at different things. Here's a line graph comparing the viral exclusion and physical loss. I was going to set them on top of each other, but again, because it's test data, the numbers were pretty similar, and I didn't want you to get lost on the difference between them.
Tina, not to interrupt, but we do have a question. If
Yes, go ahead.
let them.
Can you read
Chris?
it? Where
Chris,
is?
if you want to go ahead and ask your question. Chris, you're muted.
I'm still muted? Okay.
No, now we can hear you.
Okay. Sorry. You guys have a lot of stuff going on here. First, I want to make sure I understand what we're looking at. What Dean is sharing right now is not real data, it's test data, correct?
Correct.
Okay. The second question is, going back to what Joe presented, what outcomes are we looking at? Are we looking at getting the same outcomes that mirror exactly what the NAIC data call is? Because I think I don't have that in front of me, but essentially we're looking for number of policies by zip code and number of claims and premium written. Is that correct as well?
Yes. So this is, yes, correct.
Okay, so you're not adding anything in there. My final question is, what was the rationale to add in inland marine instead of just business owners and commercial multi-peril? Because that's what the NAIC data call is asking for, is business policies and commercial multi-peril. So what was the rationale to add in inland marine?
Yeah, I can speak to that. There's actually, we did a little bit of research over the past week or so to find out if there was any other commercial multi-peril non-liability business being written under different classes. And there's actually quite a few inland marine classes that do cover that for various types of businesses for income coverages and things like that. And it wasn't an insignificant amount of data. So we decided to pull that in to get a better full picture of what's the landscape here.
Okay, so what Dean is sharing right now is, once we get the real data in here, this is what it will look like, correct?
This will be the format of it, exactly. What Dina created was, take that template that the NAIC specified, and we basically built it in Tableau with data that we've built into the data standard for OpenIDL. So that's kind of table stakes, right? That's what was defined and put out there as a data call already. And then we wanted to see what could we do with, instead of getting just the values to put in these cells, if we had the actual data, the analytics set behind it, what could we additionally provide? And this is just a day or two of playing around with Tableau and the data to see what some other slices of that information look like.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for right now, at least.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
One of the other things that we did is we took the standard industrial classification and then just added the direct premium, so then you can see the type of businesses.
And this is a great example of how we took what the NASE call had, and then you know, some flavor that we've been hearing on other data calls, and added in, you know, the type of business we're currently using. SIC code. We also do have the class codes. I think this actually might say SIC, but we, you know, to generate the data, some we had, we use the various class codes in the different lines of business to just put this on the screen for people to start to digest.
Yeah, because I mean, once you have the data, then you can just look at it in different ways. This is just a trend, the accident date and the claims. Are there any other questions?
So I think it's going to be, I'm going to jump in real quick. I think it's important to understand the methodology. So what we've done is we've built from, sorry, I have painters in my house and crazy stuff going on. So we're building from both ends, right? We built the technical platform, right? And the nodes, getting them ready for population. And we've also worked from the other end with test data, right? We've taken data to make sure that the extraction pattern that we built, in other words, what's going to pull out this data from that harmonized data store works. And that will give us, you know, an accurate result. Now, the piece in the middle will be the company's actually loading data into that harmonized data store, right? But we've built toward that. So that's the last, that's kind of the piece that falls in. And then we can start, you know, generating this types of report. Now, the beauty of this is that you won't just have it, you don't have to just have it one time and then try to figure out how what you got is right or not right. You know, we're pretty confident because of the way the data standard is built that the information that's coming in is going to be responsive. And then you can make that call again, right? You can do this again in 2 weeks. You can do it again in 2 weeks and add a few more questions, right? And then we can look to see of the data that's gone in, what do we want to add? What additional elements in the proof of concept would make a good result for you to start visualizing and seeing. And then for those of you that you know, work in Tableau or use Tableau with any frequency, you can start looking at this in your own way, right? Because the analytics environment will allow for some output that way. So just kind of conceptualize it from there.
Robin, we have a couple questions. One came in first. Jay Kuhn, if you want to go ahead, and then we have California has one after he's done.
Yeah, thank you very much. 2 questions. One, how did you deal with proprietary class coding versus standard class coding? And what I mean by that is some carriers create their own class code structure, their own coverages, everything, and don't follow a natural standard.
And yeah, that's not lost. We handle it very similarly, and that situation similarly to how we handle quite a few things, quite honestly, with the standard. And you know, another example would be policy form. So a lot of the information about coverages and things like this are only exist in the policy language and aren't in anybody's data anywhere, right? And so what we do is we have this process in the data transformations that looks up against reference data, which we set up with the carriers jointly, so we can get from them what those codes or what the policy forms might actually, you know, mean.
So you got a lot of translation going on.
We do, and we have we decorate, you know, very minimal data with all this additional attribution based on the reference lookups that we are able to assemble with the carriers during that onboarding.
And thank you. And my last question is this a data push from the carriers, or is it a pull from you guys?
This part is a pull. To load the harmonized data stores is a push. And so to prepare the information to be able to be reported against, that's all push in, and that's working with them on their intervals and what makes sense for their technologies. And then when the extraction pattern fires, then that's a pull from those harmonized data stores, populates a temporary location that then can be aggregated, assembled, anonymizes the sources, and then is able to produce a result set for the reporting itself.
So just one more thing as a result of that question, sorry. But as a result of doing that, when you go to ask for the next coverage, it'll be easier because you're pushing an entire set of data?
It's basically the hardest part is reconfiguring the extraction pattern, which is a piece of code. To say it's basically a SQL builder. If you're familiar with writing SQL, it's just changing what's under the hood there to produce a different analytics set. The extraction patterns would then execute with a data call request, just utilizing all the existing infrastructure that's built in OpenIDL.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
California, I believe you had a question. You were next.
Hi, good morning. This is Leo from California Department of Insurance. Just wanted to comment. Great job, guys. It looks really good. I see the potential there, and I followed along on the explanation with regards to how you all set it up and how you wanted to present it. But just a quick question. Luciano and I are both on the call, and one of the jobs and one of the major lifts that we have to do is explain this very technical issue, to the folks back home, right? And put it in a way that they can understand in a meaningful way. Their concentration is on data and what do we get out of it? How can we use it? It looks wonderful on Tableau. I get it. A great job in setting up the process and all. I'm not going to get into the back end on that. But with regards to the data that's going to be coming out, for some of the states, right? Maybe, we don't have Tableau, for example, but we're really familiar with Oracle and other data sets. Is the output that you all are going to give us, something that we can put into an Oracle data set, something we can use then in that case, or is it going to reside only in that cloud environment where we can't touch it, we can't pull it out, and then we've got to work with another service provider like Tableau or another application like Tableau to fiddle around and look at that information? So that's all.
I can take that one if nobody else wants to jump in. It's to your definition. So your state will define the data call that it makes sense for California, and if it's the output is not Tableau, if it's something else, then that's totally possible. We have Oracle in-house. We have a lot of different technologies that we've used to produce different reporting, Cognos, you kind of name it. So it's really up to the definition, and then through the data call process, the carriers will either agree to consent to providing the data in that format or not. But it's all technically possible across the the breadth of whatever technology you want to utilize for that.
Okay, I'll hit on that in just a second too.
Okay, and then we had another question. Beth Drysdale?
I had to unmute myself. Thank you. Beth Drysdale, Connecticut, Department of Insurance. So I was part of the working group for the NEIC data call. And one of the things that they stressed was that class code data and that at that granular level was a huge burden to the carriers. And it looks to me like with this process, it's seamless. So it looks like we're going to be able to get down to those class codes of where claims are denied, potentially, and or paid. Is that what I'm seeing based on the class code slide that was up a couple of minutes ago?
That's definitely one of the possibilities we have here. I mean, just what we're trying to do is make that onboarding exercise as clean and efficient as possible, so that yes, those kind of barriers to the analytics that you want to see are as minimal as possible. So yeah, I think we don't have any reason to believe that this isn't something that could be provided. There's a lot of the, I think, challenge in that would be mapping to a, kind of an industry standard class code scheme, like kind of the previous question. But I think our approach with working with the carriers to get their own reference data set up, and then from that reference data, we can stand up our own categorizations on top of it, to get right to the heart of what the question might be, as opposed to trying to get the carriers to do that on their own.
So not only would we be able to see where they paid class codes, we can see where they've denied class codes.
That's all defined in the standard that we've assembled here. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome.
There's another question from George, Connecticut. Bradner? George, you'll need to unmute.
I am unmuted. So this looks really, really cool. My question is, right now you've been working with 2 companies. How much more complicated does it get as you scope this out to more companies? And, so is it as seamless regardless of 1 or 50, the process?
So let me jump in there real quick. From there are, we can do 50 certainly. When we talk about what we're looking to do for the POC, initially getting this group out there, getting another company on board, whether,
Truman, I get, I'm just thinking out into the future, as, I guess, some of it you have to build your data standards going out into the future too. And that makes, you get, us or companies getting information more seamless and easier. So I was just wondering, as you build this, they will come, I hope. But I was just wondering out loud, it's, how much work is it, if you did have 50 companies and needed to do this, versus, right now it's just a proof of concept.
Not that much, it's really not that much more difficult. That's designed to do that. It's just the question. It's roughly at this point, if they wanted to stand up an entire new node in the model that we have that for travelers in the Hartford at this point, it's a couple of days to get a new node tested and stood up, and then they're off to the races. If they wanted to leverage our multi-tenant node, so let's say it's a single state carrier, for example, there would be no technical limitations, just a matter of getting them an access credential, very similar to what we'll show you today, and then getting the data ingested to an existing environment that's shared across multiple companies. So it's fairly quick. We are, certainly after this POC, we are ready to, we are prepared to extend it to the broader marketplace as folks can come on board. And certainly Robin can tell you where she'd like it to go and when. Broader picture on the regulatory side.
Yeah, I don't think there's a barrier. We've built it so that cost is not something to keep someone from doing this. And let me just kind of say, for the smaller carriers, or for those who want to play in the multi-tenant node, the way this was built, it's no different than what you do with statistical reporting today, right? You tell companies they can report through a statistical reporter, right? And they have the system set up. What I kind of envision, George, is this replaces statistical reporting for everything. And, right now, there are even a couple states that say, thou shalt report through a particular statistical reporter. So I don't think that we're asking, and we certainly hadn't asked yet, because I think we're trying to make the case here that we should want to do this. This is innovation in this space. But time is, just think about, we were on our way to, we had homeowners, the first version already done on the standard. We were 70% done on auto. And then we pivoted, and in a matter of weeks, Joe and Dina and their team were able to build out the standard for this. And we can say, oh, it's responsive to COVID-19, but quite frankly, once that data is in the harmonized data store and the harmonized data store keeps repopulating, we can answer more than COVID-19 data calls with this. You can, maybe then you answer, riot response questions with that, because the data is there. It's just a matter of building an extraction pattern to ask the questions that you want, and then getting the companies to get that data into a harmonized data store, whether it's their own node, or in a node that's supported by AIS for the beginning. No holds barred. Quite frankly, the biggest state secret right now is we're figuring out how we actually give this away in a Linux foundation. So those negotiations are ongoing. I don't want to blow anything up, but our whole intent is that this is open source and accessible. So you're not paying for technology, you're not burdening companies with buying technology. You're just creating a way for them to have a solution toward this. It should be attractive to everyone. Okay.
Excuse me.
All right.
Cool. All right. Well, you want me to pick up real quick and see if we can get through the demo really quickly?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I want to start. Yeah. Hopefully everybody can see me okay. See my slide? Yes. So let me, back where Joe started, looking at what each node looks like from a carrier perspective. I mentioned that we're building out 6 of them at this point. And basically, this is a picture of what we have built out today that we are testing. 2 carrier nodes that each have the harmonized data store, the blockchain ledger or peer that exists on the network, and then the AAIS multi-tenant environment that we're actually going to touch in just a second. Then the analytics peer, and what Dina was just showing you would be the visualizations that would be potentially, or the data that would be potentially distributed through this endpoint. That could be one that we stand up. For example, if there's a different data call that needs to support, for example, a data extract, that might be another peer node that is stood up by an individual state or the NAIC as to provide some different interfaces to that data. And those will be dependent on those specific data calls and the destination of the data as it's called. So what we'll be doing here is looking at, see if this works, my animation work, there it is. The demo we're gonna do is looking at this particular point right here. We're actually gonna be looking at the web interface of the multi-tenant node for basically the user portal, the web UI portion of this that is accessible by the different roles, basically AAIS users as the advisory organization, potentially company users, certainly if they're the smaller companies without their own nodes, and then the regulators if they don't have their own nodes for data aggregation. So what I'm going to do is walk through the demo from the regulator perspective. We'll hit the login. Then we'll look at the lists that are available of the draft, issued, and abandoned data calls. Show you how you can create and copy a data call. So this is where we start to get consistency across different state level calls, as well as the ability to stack on top of them as the data call evolves over time. Or this is the first one we would ask at a particular event, and then there's number 2 and number 3 as we get into repetitive sorts of cycles. But we'll walk through a specific data call lifecycle from when it's initially drafted. We got an idea of a question we want to ask the market, how that gets evaluated and liked through that process and redrafted, ultimately to be issued. Then, as Joe mentioned, when AIS drafts the extraction pattern and the delivery mechanisms for that, what this is going to look like on the output. Then the insurers, we're not going to go through this in terms of what they do, but you'll see through the like pattern how this works. The insurers will log in, they will see that new issued data call, and they will have the opportunity to consent to that and participate in it when they see what that's going to do, what kind of data is being asked for, and what its purpose is. Then, as Joe mentioned, when that extraction pattern fires, that data call actually executes and the data is queried from each node, how that moves forward to the data analytics and ultimately the delivery node and how that's published. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but I think you saw the output after that. It's basically a publishing process as AIS delivers the report and the NAIC or the querying body, be it the state or the NAIC, would approve the delivery of that report for publication to the intended audience. We want to make sure what we're looking to get out of here today is at least 2 users per department and NAIC to get an email address and some basic information about that user. We are asking for a phone number and ideally an SMS and cell number for text messages in the future as we build towards multi-factor authentication, things like that. We'll get you set up so that you can log into the multi-tenant node. And you can log in and you can collaborate. You'll be able to do what I walk you through here today. You can draft, you can copy other people's data calls, you can issue them, you can change them, you can ban them, you can like them, you can do all that kind of stuff. It's important to note that your activity as a regulator is visible to the other users of the network. Right now, that's just AIS and the regulators as we have logins. The carriers will be able to see that information as of later this week. And that's basically just the data call, the data call information that is posted either as a draft or as issued, that is available as immutable clear text on the ledger, so that we know the data calls and the extraction patterns used to gather them don't change. All right, so with that, give me 1 second. Let me stop sharing, change gears. There's my little, oh, my hit it, there we go. Share.
And Truman, I don't mean to rush you, but you're probably going to have to get the abbreviated version of this.
Oh, yeah, abbreviated version. Okay, so here I am. You can see my screen. This is the login screen for OpenIDL. This will be very quick, and again, it's very easy, and this is an environment you are feel free to play in. The real data calls that we'll use to respond will create after this, and this is a demo environment that I'm playing in right now. The logins you have will be to the nodes that are in production. In the interest of time, what I'll do is go in here and look at a data call that's already been drafted by Ohio. It's got a couple of versions in place. I can go ahead and click on this. I've logged in as a member of the Colorado DOI. I can see that there's 2 versions of the data call, the current version, the previous version. I can see the name, the jurisdiction that's there, description, the deadline of it. So this would be intended to fire on Friday. Premium dates, lost dates. So basically, this is what it looked like what did your business look like as of January for property lines. We expect this to be a public report at the end of the day. Brief purpose of what this is designed to do, what kind of criteria will be brought in. So this is to what Dina and Joe we're talking about, the exact fields that'll be coming in, how what will be queried from the carrier data, and then what carriers are subject to this. Since this looks good, I want to have consistent data with our partners in Ohio. I'm in Colorado. What I'm going to go ahead and do is clone this. So yep, that's great. It changed it to Colorado automatically because I'm logged in here. Everything else looks good. Basically the same. There's nothing else I wanted to add on top of this or formatting I wanted to change. For the interest of time, I'll go ahead and issue this. I could have actually, you didn't see it on the last one, I could have liked the data call from Ohio, which would have indicated to Ohio that there's starting to be some traction. There's some interest in that data call, that if that was to be issued, presumably that would mean there would be some consent if it was a carrier to that, if it was issued, or that if it was issued as a pure regulator, you would clone it and issue the same call. So at that point now we've got an issued data call. It actually says Ohio, because I didn't change the name, but it's issued. The Ohio data call is now issued in Colorado. So at that point now, the carrier can log in, again, the very abbreviated version. The carrier can log in through a very similar process, can look at this data call in a very similar list, and then see this sort of information, and they'll have a button that would say consent to this data call. AIS would create the extraction pattern link. They would have that here so they could see exactly what code is going to be run, and I will do really quickly here. I actually have one of those handy, so let me show that real quick just so you can see it. This information is managed through the ledger, so that this query, if you can see my screen right now, this is the actual code that will be run to derive the data set that'll be used for the analytics. And this is, again, managed through the blockchain, so that once a data call is issued, once the extraction pattern is attached to that data call, it cannot be updated. A new data call would have to be issued. And that way, as a carrier, you can be assured that the question isn't going to change underneath you. Once you agree to respond to the data call, the regulators can't change the question and ask for something more detailed than was originally stated. So I will stop there. And with 5 minutes to spare, give it back to you, Robin.
Okay, so the reason we're showing this to you is so you can start to see what you would see on the front end of actually in this environment issuing data calls. And I think it's important to understand as you're looking at that and you're thinking about what additional information you'd like, for example, whether a claim has been paid under a certain class code or denied under a certain class code. that's an excellent next question, right, to ask. And so you could put that in that query, right? You could create something that asks that question. And so what we'd like to do as a follow-up and kind of the things to move forward on is, if you will send us from your state whom you would like to have to be able to log on, so you can, again, just start interacting with the front end of this, and you can start kind of exploring how to use that. We would ask that you would send us your an email contact from each state whom you would designate to be the login for this. The second thing we'd like to ask is, again, we'll send an attachment with your top writers of this coverage, and take a look at it. If there's a company you just have a really great relationship with and you think they're in a position where they would want to do this, I don't think we're asking people to do handstands and drink a glass of water at the same time. This is not as hard as it seems when you first make the ask, and we'll be able to, we'll be at any meeting you want to have to talk about that with any company you think could come in. I don't think that, I think it'd be great if we could concentrate on AIG, Cincinnati, Philadelphia especially, and farmers, if those are certainly big state, right? But those are big riders in each one of these states. So take a look at the list, get back with us if you have any special push. We are not behind. It is okay. We can bring a third in. And the value of the third is that just gives more protections to Hartford and travelers around the information that they're putting in the harmonized data store and that they're allowing in this test environment. And this proof of concept gives them more anonymity. And that means that you can share the results and show off this tool more, but we need to make sure that they have a comfort level with that. So a significant third would be good, and that could be a large state rider. And so we at least have that visibility for at least one state, but you will all have the ability to see what those results were for those two large carriers, which are pretty valid in most of the states that are participating. So those are the two asks from you to move forward. You know, send us those contacts. Also think about a major third and or a significant state rider from your state. And then also to start thinking about the type of questions like Beth brought forward around, you know, using these class codes, what was paid, what was denied. Those are excellent next questions to put in there. So start thinking about that and what you'd like to see in that extraction. Did I miss anything, Truman?
No, I think that's everything. Let me check our agenda here.
And now I have yard people outside, so you getting all
Perfect.
kind of noise from me.
I just wanted to mention I'll be sending the recording out to you all later today. It'll be on a YouTube channel. And then if you want to reply back to that email with your information around, I'll restate what information we need. You can reply back to me on that. This is Lori.
Great. Do we have any other questions from the states? And I'm certainly open this up to our companies in Hartford and travelers. Any comments or concerns or things that you'd like to bring forward to the states?
Not required.
So, hi, Robin. This is Jim. Can you hear me?
Hey, Jim.
Yeah.
I'm having many technical difficulties today. So when you say, I know that you want to try and anonymize the data, you know, maybe from the regulator side, but in the example that Joe, you know, and others just showed, if it was just, you know, the Hartford and travelers, would I be able to see as a carrier that report that was just displayed?
So
My suggestion would be no, because yeah, you could then pull your data out of the totals and
Right.
understand what your competitor, right? You know, so that's part of the, you know, subjectivity has to go into it is can this information be shared out? If there's only two, then it doesn't make sense to do such, right? You don't want to be able to identify through, you know, reverse engineering the report who somebody else is. That's one of the reasons why 3 or more carriers makes the most sense for this, right?
I guess when it comes from, you know, if the states are looking at it, I have less concern because we're giving them our data for, you know, for our carriers, our respective carriers anyway. But it would only be if I was able to see it, like I wouldn't want the ability to see the traveler's data, right? Like, or maybe I would, but like, you know what I'm saying?
Right, it'd be only the summarized data that you'd be able to see your detailed data relative to, right? So you wouldn't,
Right.
it wouldn't be the exact same data set, it would be a metadata set.
Right. If I wanted to see mine in that format, like I said, you know, when we talk about consent and you know, all the power of blockchain and the security levels, like we would consent to doing the call, but I'm not consenting that anyone that participated in that call can see the data and slice and dice it any way they want to.
Correct, right. You could run that extraction pattern that we saw against the data that exists on your own node and display it in Tableau on your own node and see basically the same question of just your data and see what the comparative reports would look like.
Right. Yep. I would have to do that myself. Right. Yeah. You get, yep. Okay.
But I think that's part of the reason that the third is important to get to, especially if we want to if the regulators want to, you know, if this is what you want and this does what you want and you like it and you want to do more of it, to make your case in a public forum, we're gonna need a third participant to make that a more public consumption type of activity. I think we can we can do the proof of concept, you will see it, but to be able to be more public in what you observed and what your result was, it's probably we're gonna need that third. But again, we are not behind. It is okay. We got to get the third, but we've had enough work going on from both directions of this to basically be able to solve toward and let that third participant come on and not really lose any traction, because we're just getting to the point where we would have those nodes being populated, with data from the companies anyway. So not behind, probably need to do that soon, but the sooner we do it, the quicker we can run the extraction pattern and give you that visualization tool and analytics environment exposure that you'll want to see. So that's where we are. If we have any more questions. Okay, doesn't look like it. Again, you'll see a follow-up from Lori with some of the information from today, as well as the recording. You're welcome to share this with whomever you want, especially around your department. If you have commissioners that want to know what the heck you're doing, welcome to share. Welcome to introduce that, and then again, sidebars for any statistically relevant writers that you'd like to help us bring into for this big third. Okay, I think that's a wrap. Thank you.
Robin, I want to thank you, Robin. I want to thank you guys, and this is really good, and I really appreciate everything you guys are doing.
Thanks, George.
Thank you.
See you later.
Great. Ciao.